This episode is brought to you by my very first book, The Fifth Vital Sign: Master Your Cycles and Optimize Your Fertility. With over 1,000 research citations, it is the most comprehensive resource on fertility awareness and the menstrual cycle to date. Head over to fertilityfriday.com/vitalsign for a free sample of the first chapter. That's fertilityfriday.com/vitalsign. This is the Fertility Friday podcast, episode number 243. Welcome to the 243rd episode of the Fertility Friday podcast. Thank you for joining me today. I'm Lisa from fertilityfriday.com, and this is your source of information about the fertility awareness method and all things fertility. I'm really excited to share today's podcast episode with you. In today's episode, I'm sharing an interview with Kimberly Ann Johnson, and she is the host of the Mega Mama podcast and the author of the Fourth Trimester. And we have just a wonderful conversation about the postpartum period. This is the type of conversation that I was enjoying so much that I didn't want it to end, and really just jumping at some of these really crucial issues for women, especially after having babies. One of the things that I really appreciated about this podcast episode was how, in Kimberly's work, in her book, and, in our conversation, she's really touching on something that's missing from our culture, generally speaking. And what that is kind of a way to honor the postpartum period and really to take care of the mom. She highlights how many traditional cultures have very specific practices and a specific period of time where the mother is actually taken care of, and that just allows her to take care of her brand new baby. And that's something that's largely missing, from our culture today. So really excited to share today's interview with you. I've had quite a few reach out to me and ask me about the audiobook for The Fifth Vital Sign: Master Your Cycles and Optimize Your Fertility. So when I first released the book a couple of weeks ago, it was in paperback and ebook format. I am still working on the audiobook. I'm really excited though, because it's almost done. I'm in the final editing stages. I had the whole book recorded several weeks ago, but of course the editing just takes a bit of time just to make sure that the sound is on point. And so just as a quick update, still working on that, and I will let you know as soon as it is available. And in case you haven't already, you can grab the first chapter of The Fifth Vital Sign over at thefifthvitalsignbook.com. So you can actually jump in, grab the first chapter, and you'll also be able to see the table of contents, the foreword, the introduction. So you'll get a really good sense of what is in the book and what topics are covered, as well as getting a sneak peek of the information by checking out the first chapter. The first chapter is all about the concept of the menstrual cycle as a vital sign and illustrates the different ways that your menstrual cycle can change and reflect what's happening in your overall health. So I know you will love that. So again, that's thefifthvitalsignbook.com. Now let's jump into today's episode with Mega Mama. And I'm excited to be here today with Kimberly Ann Johnson, also known as Mega Mama. Kimberly is a sexological bodyworker, somatic experiencing trauma resolution practitioner, birth doula, and single mom. She specializes in helping women prepare for birth, recover from birth injuries and birth trauma, and heal from sexual trauma. She is the founder of megamama.com, an international holistic women's healthcare resource for expectant and new mothers. She is the co-founder of the Stream School for Pelvic Care, where she trained birth professionals, yoga teachers, somatic therapists, and bodyworkers to help women prepare for birth and recover from birth. She's the author of the bestselling book, The Fourth Trimester, a postpartum guide to healing your body, balancing your emotions, and restoring your vitality. And in today's episode, we're going to be talking all about the fourth trimester, what happens after you give birth. And I'm really excited to dig into her book. So thank you so much for being here, Kimberly.
Thanks, Lisa.
Well, as I was saying to you earlier, I had a chance to read your book over the past few days. And I was just really struck by your personal experience of birth and how it obviously shaped your practice and everything that you do now. And so I thought that might be a good place to start, if you might share with us what your experience was like in your fourth trimester and how that really kind of catapulted you into what you're doing now.
Sure. So I had a bit of what I think is unusual, but now hearing thousands of women's birth stories, there's always a lot of common threads, even where we think things are unusual. But I was living in another country. I was living in Brazil. I had just met my daughter's father within the year. So I met him, got pregnant in 2 months, and then I was having a baby within that year. I was doing it in Portuguese, which was a new language for me. I always knew that I wanted a home birth. So I did everything that I could to be able to have a home birth, which included moving from where we were living to a city, lots of internet searching, trying to figure out how to find a midwife. And I rented an apartment specifically knowing that I was going to have a baby in the apartment. So that was, a different kind of a challenge. And the birth itself, I went into labor at 42 weeks and 3 days. So, by most measures, far after my guess date. And I was not surprised because my mom often went way past her dates as well, until her third, she decided to induce at her due date. And so far as births go, I think it was, people look at my story and they go, oh, your birth was so traumatic. But actually, I think the birth itself there were definitely things to work through afterwards. But I find that that's true no matter how heartbreaking or how heartwarming someone's birth is, that there's always gems and soul lessons to negotiate and renegotiate, being that it's a threshold, rite of passage experience. But the outcome of the birth was that I had a tear, and I was never really sure how bad it was because I tried to ask, how many stitches are there and what's going on and all that. But I just got really vague answers like, it's going to be fine. We don't know how many stitches there are. But as a consequence of the material that they used, which was the first time they had used that material, my body rejected the suturing. And so I just didn't heal well. And that pain, discomfort, and the accompanying symptoms of fecal incontinence and just constant lower back and sacral pain, months later when I would try to go back to intercourse, it was totally impossible, just extremely painful. And I had never really been in chronic pain before. I was a yoga teacher and a body worker. And of course I'd have little things here or there, but I'd never been in pain like all day long. So then I had trouble breastfeeding and producing enough breast milk, which of course I was super stressed, and my daughter's father was working nights and then sleeping during the day. So I was really alone. And as a result of that, I fortunately could tell that it wasn't just a personal problem I was having. It wasn't just me having a hard time. I really realized wow, this is a really important time and I have no support. I don't know what's going on. I don't know where to find the right information. I am asking my midwife for more help and she's not giving it to me. And so I started to research and over time try to understand what is it that's special about that time. And then I began to do my work and write the book.
Mm-hmm. Well, thank you for taking us through that. I think I appreciate that you clarified your experience that the birth itself was not necessarily traumatic, but it was more what happened afterwards that was the biggest challenge. And what struck me was that, it's as you mentioned, you said after speaking with thousands of women and hearing their birth stories, it's not so uncommon, but of course at the time you wouldn't have known that. And also just how long the recovery process took, because essentially you didn't have the support that you needed. So,
I think I wrote something about 6 months ago and it became a meme, which was I had too much postpartum support and then said no one ever. Even those of us who then become educated about it and try to get the support, we're trying to replace something on an individual personal level that's actually a sociocultural task. So it's really hard outside of a context of a culture like Hong Kong, Taiwanese culture. Some cultures really have very intact postpartum practices and they bring them to if they're immigrants, they bring them with them. But yeah, I had never heard the term birth injury. I didn't really understand that that was even a possibility of an outcome of birth. I wasn't afraid of it, but I also just had no idea that that was a possible outcome.
Mm-hmm. Well, and there's so many different things, so many different areas I want to touch on. But one of the questions that comes to mind was that in the book, you described having an experience with a body worker and having a lot of the symptoms that were chronic for quite a long time kind of like go away. And so maybe you could share a little bit about that, but also do you think that if you had had that type of support earlier on, that, this kind of 2-year process or, you tell us how long the healing process was, but this kind of lengthy process of healing would have been, dramatically shortened?
For sure. If I knew now if I knew then what I know now, for sure, because there's just so many ways that we can support ourselves and support other new moms in recovery that really addresses all aspects of ourself, which is what we need, because every aspect of ourself is profoundly altered during birth. I recently just went to Brazil for 3 weeks, and it was a really horrible trip. And from start to finish, like I lost my wallet on the plane going there. And then on the way back, I had only one credit card that had been FedExed to me. And somehow I lost that. And I haven't lost a wallet since college. So I was just like, there's just something way bigger than me happening here. And there was a chapter that closed with my daughter's father. And it was just like at every turn, it was difficult. And my friend got held up at gunpoint. Like it was just like a dismemberment. And when I came back, which was now like 8 days ago, I realized like I am in an altered state right now because I was totally in a great zone when I went. And then I had this like completely almost otherworldly experience because you go to, I flew to another continent. It's extreme. It was expensive. It was like lots of bus rides to get where I was going. And I thought, I'm 1 week out now and I'm just barely on a sleep schedule and I'm just barely eating what I should be eating and barely feeling like I have skin thick enough to like meet with friends or do anything. And I'm like, this is what women do after they have babies. They don't recognize that they're in an altered state and they try to return to do the same things they were doing. And then we get badges for doing that. So if you go back to yoga class in 10 days, it's like, oh my God, you're amazing. Look at you. Rather than like, you're crazy, like get back in bed. You need to be cocooned and sequestered. We just don't really know how to do dark times. And dark doesn't even mean like bad or depressive. It just means like fallow. We don't know how to really rest. And that from your work with menstrual cycles. It's like to tell a woman to rest 1 day a month. It's like, what do you mean? Like, I want us to keep exercising and like, I have a rhythm and I want to stay in this. Like I have goals. So why are you taking me away from my goals? And with birth, it's like and I was noticing on this rite of passage journey that I didn't sign up for. Like when you're pregnant, your body is getting remade before your eyes. But I didn't even have a physical event. I stayed healthy the whole time. And yet it's still taking me a lot of time to even orient myself. Mm-hmm. So I see women and the messaging's out there. You live in Canada, so you guys have decent maternity leave. And I live in the US where we're still really in the, but we've made a lot of progress. Actually, it's funny because the Canadians sometimes I posted something that in California, the governor Newsom there's something up for 6 months of maternity leave. And of course the Americans, we're all just like, that's incredible because our average maternity leave is 2 weeks. And the Canadians chime in, that's not enough, and I'm like, dude, back off, like give us our 6 months, step by step here. So, there's the structural parts of it. I'm a freelancer and I always have been. So I was able to take time off, but it just was, I didn't know about, I'd never heard of, it would be 8 years before I heard of vaginal steaming. Never had heard of sexological bodywork before. I'd heard of pelvic floor PT, but didn't know how to find one in Brazil. I knew what the word incontinence meant, but I had zero idea that that could even be a potential outcome for me, because by all, outside measures, as I'm healthy, I'm flexible. I had been a vegetarian for a really long time, which I thought was good. Now I realize that predisposed me to injury, but I didn't know that at the time. I like quote unquote did all the right things, but I did all the right things for the birth. I didn't do anything for the postpartum period, which I'd never even heard the words fourth trimester before I had a baby. And someone goes, well, what was your postpartum plan? It's like, I made up that word. Like, I mean, I'd never heard of it. Like nothing. My postpartum plan was a sling and my breast.
Yeah. Drink water.
Seriously.
And breastfeed. Yeah.
Yeah. I was like, how hard can this be? I've babysat before.
Well,
I'm serious.
Yeah.
I was like, I'm the oldest. I've got cousins. I love babies. How hard can this be?
Yeah. I can so relate to what you're like, because you go into new mom and it's like you're run over by a bus or something, because it's just on all levels, like physically, regardless of how the baby comes into the world, emotionally, like there's just all of these layers. So let's start, let's talk about the fourth trimester and what is it? So how would you define it? And you touched on how other cultures actually acknowledge it and have specific practices to support women during this time. And so maybe tell us a little bit about that, and just, I think it's pretty clear what our culture's lacking, but maybe take us through it more specifically.
Yeah. So in the best case scenario, which I always like to start with, and sometimes this makes people a little mad because they think it's really unrealistic, but I don't think so. And if we understand just how important it is, just like you would be able to talk to someone about how important it is for them to really understand their own menstrual cycles. And by the way, it's totally related, because if someone's really gotten close to their own menstrual cycle, they enjoy it, they understand what the messages are that it has to tell them, their postpartum period is going to be a lot simpler. Because if you've ever learned to rest in accordance with your bodily needs, your body's going to, because it's one thing to know you should rest, and it's another thing to know how to rest.
Mm-hmm.
Everybody knows they should rest, but are we really able to when it comes time to it, right? How many people have sleeping problems? And we're at a place in our culture where these basic functions like sleep and digestion are really hard for people because of all of the stress and environmental stuff. So the postpartum time can be this major reset. And there's a great, actually, Chinese, maybe you know her. She's a Chinese medicine doctor. She lives in Toronto. She wrote a book called Reflections of the Moon on Water. And she talks about how she had always had chronic migraines. And in her postpartum time, she and her husband are TCM practitioners. She cured herself of the chronic migraines. Why? Because at this time, just like menstrual time, but in the postpartum time, our health is very impressionable. And so what we're seeing is that go in a negative direction now a lot, where people are getting autoimmune disorders and super depleted and depressed. But on the other side of that is that we have this chance to really boost our system towards the optimal health and even repair things from the past.
Mm.
But how do we do that? So in India, they call it the sacred window. And in Chinese medicine, they call it the golden month, or they call it sitting in the nest in Vietnam, or sitting the month in some cultures. And it's this notion, and it's not even something, it's like, I have a friend who lives in Hong Kong. When her cousin had a baby, she flew from Hong Kong to San Diego to be with her for like 2 weeks. It's like more important than a wedding, or more important than really anything. It's for the mom. It's not for the baby. It's because they know that if the mom is well taken care of, then she can take care of her baby, but she needs this support at this time. And so I looked around the world. I'd already spent a lot of time in India. I went to Thailand. I went to Malaysia to really look at how, and in Thailand, there was a lot of Korean. So I learned something about how the Koreans do it. What do they have in common about this period of time that they consider to be, discreet and special and really important enough to give daily care every day for 40 days? So the first thing is an extended rest period. And that really means confinement. And of course, a Western woman does not want to hear that word, confinement. Like, we don't want to hear it. Like, we don't want to be confined. But it really means like not going out of your house. Or if you do, just going for a walk around the block. It means conserving every last bit of energy, even when you feel like you don't need to. And that's really hard for us in our culture. We just think about it like, if we've got it to spend, we should spend it. We shouldn't conserve. I talk about like how I used to deal with my gas tank in my 20s. I ran out of gas so many times because I would, say I'm on a road trip. I want to just make it that extra mile. So when I fill up, it goes that extra amount, and it's like, but I would run out. Now, when I'm a quarter of a tank and I pass a gas station and I have some time, it's like, why don't I just go refill it? So that's what needs to happen at this time. But the thing is, so the first need is an extended rest period. Some cultures is 30 days, some 45, some 60, but somewhere between 30 and 60 days. In Ayurveda, it's 42 days. 40 days is kind of known as a period of time that's like habit changing, but also a lot of cultures have this. In Brazil, people freak out if you're out of the house before 30 days because they do vaccinations then. And so it's kind of known you shouldn't be out of the house before then. The second is nourishing food. So every culture has special foods they feed women at this time. And I say feed women because nowadays people take on this fourth trimester stuff and they're so frustrated because really women aren't supposed to be coordinating their own care at this time. Like we're not supposed to be making ourselves all of this food, which I realize is challenging and potentially daunting to figure out how that would happen. But, there's meal trains, there's a meal delivery service. And I believe that this is a time that we should save for so that we have, somewhere between $3,000 to $7,000 for the 6 weeks so that we can really get the exquisite care that we need. And I promise that will be savings in the long run of all of the practitioners' appointments and possibly psychology appointments, trying to figure out what the hell went wrong and why we feel so bad. The food helps us rebuild tissues. It helps basically rebuild. It helps the detoxification process of the uterine cleansing, and then it helps to rebuild. So it's usually collagen dense, really mineral rich, things that can support ligamental strength so that the uterus can go back to its original size and tone. The third one is loving touch. So every culture has its own kind of body work that's for this time. And we think of body work as a luxury, like, oh, I had one massage or something. This is every day for 40 days in India, it's with like specific oils to hydrate and nourish the tissues. And it's considered exercise. So it's rigorous. If you see, they have postpartum nurses in Hong Kong. That's what a lot of women do right when they find out they get pregnant, is they book a postpartum nurse that the government it's a retired woman that the government has trained. And if you watch her she gives the mom and the baby massages. It's intense. I mean, it's like long strokes on the long bones, circular strokes, but they are really trying to help the body detox from all of the hormonal shifts, realign from anything that could have gotten out of, could have and probably did get out of alignment. And it strengthens, again, it like gives the body the building blocks that it needs to restructure itself. The fourth one is presence of wise women. So birth is really the territory of women. And as you probably know, if you ask women what their postpartum plan is, a lot of them say, my husband's off of work for 7 days or 10 days. And then I repeat the question, what's your postpartum plan? Because it's not that partners can't be amazing. And many women do have amazing partners, both male and female and all genders. But the partner is also going through their own rite of passage. And in general, it's women who know how to be with other women in birth. It's like would you go to a man to help you out with your period? I mean, people do because they go to their gynecologist, but like if you're really trying to understand that magic, you'd go to another woman who'd been bleeding for a long time. So we really need our circle for many, many reasons. Women should not be alone with new babies for more than a couple hours at a time. New moms need exactly what new babies need. And we need to be mothered at that time. And then the final one is contact with nature. And that can happen in a lot of different ways. That can happen through herbs, through steaming, through imbibing them. It can happen through putting your rocking chair near a window so that, we're really in tune with these rhythms that are much larger than ourselves.
Mm-hmm. I was just basically, nodding my head. And of course, when you talk about all of those things, any woman who's had a baby is going to be reflecting on their own postpartum experience.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, what you described, if all of us had that type of loving support during that time, the experience would be completely different. And, in my case, I had aspects of that. But as you describe it, having gone through it, I mean, the only thing you have to ask yourself is like, what happens when you don't have that? And that is basically this huge prevalence of postpartum depression and all kinds of health conditions that arise postpartum. You touched on autoimmune disorders. We've already touched on some of the birth injury that our medical system isn't even equipped to identify and support. So maybe just talk about, I think I'm just enjoying just this idea of women caring for other women and actually being adequately and properly cared for, and actually acknowledging this period of time, how important it is. All of the things you described help the woman mother.
Definitely. And, I tell the spouses, it's like, this is like, if you want a sex life again at some point and you want to feel that you have your partner's attention, this is the time to invest in. It will return itself thousands of times over. Women are depleted, exhausted, and alone for most of their postpartum period, in most cases. We would be having a completely different, this whole thing about, mental health screenings, like that's supposed to be the new American College of Gynecology guidelines. Now we're going to screen women more and they're going to have more postpartum doctor visits. Well, most women that I know, their postpartum doctor visit is so inadequate that more of them isn't going to help, right? They go to their 6-week checkup and it's like, okay, it's under 5 minutes. There's no open infection or open sores and green light for sex and exercise, even though a woman has no idea how she would possibly approach those things. And furthermore, most of the environments you go to, you go to a yoga class, they don't ask you if you just had a baby. And if they do, and you say yes, they're just going to say, well, take care of yourself. But we don't know what that means. We can't. When you're in the middle of a huge transformation, you can't see yourself. You don't know where you're at in that process. You need other people around you helping you. That's why I'm always like, I think that the grandmothers should be the postpartum doulas, because they're the ones that moms will listen to when the mom's like, I'm going to go to Target. She's not going to listen to her 22-year-old doula saying, no, you shouldn't. But she'll listen to somebody older that's like, no, you're not going to Target right now. Like, get back in bed. No, this isn't, it's not time for you to go to the grocery store. I'll go to the grocery store. And new moms know it. You do one thing and you're exhausted, right? Like, it's like your day has one thing in it, and then you come home and you start bleeding more. And the next day you're sore and you don't know why. And it's not, I'm not blaming women. I'm frustrated about it, but I don't blame women because, there's so many women who tell me they had an episiotomy. They leave the hospital. They ask the nurse, is there anything that I should or shouldn't do? And they go, oh, for the next couple of days, don't lift anything heavier than 5 pounds, which of course the woman's going to do because she's going to lift the car seat in and out of the car driving. And that's it. There's no other reference point. They don't say, wait until you go for a long walk, or make sure I had a client who had twins 10 days postpartum. I called her she's read my book. She knows, and she's out on a mile walk, and she's still on Vicodin, recovering from the cesarean. But it's because we're carrying such a high level of stress and anxiety. And as women, we've learned we can manage that through exercise. And that's what we've been told is healthy, right? Because that makes sense to me. Like, what else is healthy? Smoothies are healthy, salads are healthy, exercise is healthy. All of those things are the wrong things to do postpartum.
Well, so
it's a totally different set of rules.
Well, and as we're into this conversation and, as I'm thinking about it, you said something earlier, which is this is like basically something that is like a hole in our culture because our culture doesn't acknowledge it. And it's interesting. This morning, I had a conversation with a guest on the podcast. We were talking essentially about the patriarchy and about this world that we live in that's very masculine. And it's kind of like that machine analogy where we're just supposed to be like robots and, we just do all this stuff. So as a woman who's kind of been through, birth, in your book, you talk about it as a rite of passage, and you talk about how it changes you as a person. It changes your body. One interesting piece of information on like a physiological level is that pregnancy is a time when you're exposed to more progesterone than you ever would be. And it quite literally changes your breast tissue and like physically changes your brain. Like, so there's actual physiological changes that happen in your body similar to puberty, where you come out on the other side actually like physically a different person, let alone the experience of birth.
Did you know that when you deliver the placenta, your progesterone drops 300%?
I mean, like that should say something. Like that's insane. And then throughout the next couple of days, your hormones shift just incredibly.
Yeah, you're basically what your placenta was doing, your ovaries have to start doing. And so there's a transition there where your ovaries are like getting sent signals. Okay, now it's your turn. At the same time as all of the rest of the physiology, the blood loss and all of the rest of the processes are going on. So it makes sense. We have all of these things that probably a lot of your listeners have heard about, like belly binding and isolated. So you started off by saying it's like a black hole in the culture. And in general, for most people, it is. And it's happening on every level. It's happening at the highest level from a political level because we don't have adequate, leave. So how can a woman do any of these things if she has to be back at work in 4 weeks, right? Mm-hmm. And how could she even remotely relax knowing that time is ticking and imagining how she going to really be able to do that? But then from this deeper level sort of, it's one of the unfortunate outcomes of feminism in a way is that feminism was defined in opposition to motherhood. Motherhood was imprisoning. Let's let women get out of the house and be able to do more than that. And as a result, we are now lauded for being super women and, all the titles of books are about badass this and I always tell everyone, I know women are badasses. Like I know women, like I'm sure that a woman who is going to give birth could climb Kilimanjaro. I've already had clients doing headstands. I think I probably did a handstand when I was like 41 weeks. Like I know women can do anything. Like I know women can lift heavy weights when they're pregnant. I know that women can go back to work after 45 minutes because I've had clients who did that. They got their laptop out 45 minutes after delivery. I know someone who showed a house, a real estate agent, the same day that she had a baby. But we just have to be smarter than that because probably everyone listening knows a lot of people who have autoimmune problems and who are having long-term health challenges. And it's related to how we deal with our cycles, which is why you wrote an entire book on it. Why, it's that important to restoring our true power, not a false sense of power that's an imitation of and complete alignment with the patriarchy, where we just try to adopt that form of power. But it's actually a true reclamation where we don't have to ignore our bodies and we can actually listen to them for what they're telling us. And for sure, if somebody takes these 40 days seriously and has even, because no one's going to do it perfectly, and life is life. I have a friend who hired a postpartum doula, and the woman quit after 3 weeks and she couldn't find someone else. She tried to do everything to be able to have those things, but it's also we're in a moment of cultural remembering, because this is knowledge that we had pre-industrial age. Like in the US, it used to be called lying in. So it was known that women needed this. It was only when it turned into the industrial age, where we became cogs in a machine that had to produce that, and where we gave birth over to men, that it became something that it is now, where, what do you mean you need anything special? And the thing is that most of our moms and grandmothers didn't have the help they needed. So they view it in most cases as very entitled, selfish. What's the big deal? I posted something about motherhood the other day, and this woman who is clearly in her 60s wrote back that, like, why do you make it sound so difficult? I had 4 kids and it was fine. It's
that word fine is my favorite word of all time.
Yeah,
everything's
fine.
fine.
I did it. What are you making the big deal out of? And I get it, because it's hurtful, the care that our mothers and our grandmothers got. Some of our grandmothers gave birth blacked out, right? Twilight birth. So
for the listeners who don't know what that is, black them out and then pull out the baby with forceps. Is that just because there's listeners who have no idea?
Okay. Yeah. Like in the 1940s, people felt bad for women, that women experienced pain during childbirth, what they labeled as pain. And so they decided what would be more humane would be to just have a person be totally blacked out. I think it was morphine. And then the woman doesn't remember giving birth. She wakes up and the baby's been pulled out. And, that's a brutal, but was a common practice for a generation. So of course that impacts bonding. Of course that impacts breastfeeding. And we're in a cultural pendulation where, when I wrote this book, so I finished it, I guess, 2.5 years ago, and then it came out a year ago. It's radically different now than when I finished it. Like, people have heard of the term fourth trimester. Women are coming out and saying, like, this isn't right. Things aren't working. I don't accept the fact that I'm just going to be permanently damaged, because a lot of times women go to doctors and say, hey, I think I have a prolapse. And the doctor goes, yeah, well, you probably do, but just keep having as many kids as you're going to have, and then we'll give you surgery afterwards. And women are realizing that's not adequate, and that we have a lot of tools that we can apply both preventatively and when there is a problem. And women are now demanding that. But it takes a little time for the system to catch up. Ideally, it would be amazing. And it's something, Kelly, Steamy Chick, and I talk about a lot, is just like, what level of intervention is going to have the most impact the fastest? How can we get more women better postpartum care, in the next 5 years, not in the next 25 years, so that our daughters have different experiences? And so that's where we put a lot of energy into the fourth trimester vaginal steam study project. We think that steaming might be the sort of most cost-effective, highest return practice. Mm-hmm. And we'll be finding that out, because we'll have data in April. But if people are listening and they didn't have any of this care, me neither. I didn't have any of it. That's why I do the work that I do. You asked me earlier about the body work. I just got it was like God threw me an angel in the form of Ellen Heed, who I then co-founded 8 years later, the Stream School that you mentioned in the intro. And I got internal pelvic floor work together with trauma tracking. And it was the combination of the internal work together with the nervous system piece that then began to dissolve the scar tissue. Also with the biochemical and biomechanical properties of castor oil. But I didn't know, prior to that, I had pelvic floor PT, but not with a scar tissue emphasis, and not with kind of the emphasis on birth story listening at the same time as doing the internal work. And that was where I did the biggest piece of healing. And that's amazing. And there are practitioners who do that work. And I believe that even in the most traumatic of circumstances, from a birth perspective, like the births that just don't go right, that a person plans one thing and everything goes wrong. If a woman has the 40-day care and really respects the fourth trimester, I believe most women will heal from almost any birth scenario.
Mm-hmm. Well,
because of the valence of the system. The system is so open at that time, spiritually, emotionally, physically, that giving it the right input, giving it the right support, food, touch, that the body will really repair this and the psyche will repair.
Mm-hmm. Well, and the way I see it is you're really giving a woman love. One of my tendencies is to focus on, the science and like these very like tangible pieces of information. In many ways, I feel like it's a trend to be super like in that masculine kind of zone and to have this like tangible evidence. So I certainly go there. But what I think is interesting is that like, in addition to all of the physical things that we're talking about, the physical changes to the body and the physical trauma to the body, whether it's a cesarean section or a vaginal delivery, maybe what we could talk a little bit about, because I know you talk about this in the book, is the emotional and spiritual aspect of it. Because I really liked, you had a horrible experience in Brazil, and I'm like, I can't even begin to imagine what that was like for you. When you were talking about it, though, you tied it in beautifully to just what happens in birth. And in the example, you didn't have anything physically done to you, but it was still very impactful and still impacting you. So with birth, you have this kind of combination of this physical, it's always a physical experience. Whether, regardless of how positive or negative you interpret it, even if you have the most positive birth experience, you still have physical trauma to your body. But you also have this intense emotional and spiritual aspect of it. And what you talked about with, the internal physiotherapy that you had being that it was connected to the emotional aspect, which I thought was interesting because in our culture, there's just, I don't know, we just don't really acknowledge even the emotional aspect of it.
Yeah. So our healthcare is so compartmentalized, and it shows up glaringly postpartum, where if a woman goes to PT and she starts to cry, they're like, oh, we don't deal with emotions. You got to go to a psychologist for that. Here's a referral to a psychiatrist. And then if a woman's postpartum and goes to a psychiatrist, I flip out because the psychiatrists, they don't ask things like, are you prolapsed or are you incontinent? Because being incontinent or having an organ prolapse makes you feel disoriented, helpless, and groundless. It's a physical sensation that has emotional connections to it.
Well, and
in
broken.
General,
I'll just
in our life, broken. We don't, unless you're like an intense yoga practitioner, people don't have relationships with their organs. Like we don't think about our heart that's beating. Most people probably don't even know where their liver is. So we're not connected to our organs until something goes wrong. When something is wrong with your organic body, like your kidney or your uterus, or your uterus is actually falling out or down, it is an extremely scary and strange feeling. And so to me, when someone says, well, yeah, I have postpartum depression, and so many people say that now, they ask me what I do for work. I say, oh, I wrote a book. What did you write a book about? I wrote a book about the postpartum period. It's called Fourth Trimester. They go, oh, I didn't have that. And I was like, oh, I thought you just said you had a baby. Oh yeah, but I had postpartum with my first one, but not with my other ones. It's become synonymous with the word depression. And I'm not surprised because we don't have any of the care that we need that would even remotely address us not feeling lost and disoriented. But when you're a postpartum mental health worker, but you don't know anything about the body, I don't understand how you can help a postpartum woman, because it's this false dichotomy that our bodies and our minds are somehow two completely separate things and that we can treat them completely differently. So this is where my yoga practice really, it came to life when I really understood what it meant to heal all levels simultaneously and that there was no separation. Because it wasn't until I got attuned care that was addressing each level at the same time that healing happened for me. And then I went on to, see the past 3 years, I worked with like 800 women, helping them with the same kind of things. Mm-hmm. And saw the same thing again and again, that when I got to the core belief and when I got to the moment that the scar, a scar is a physical artifact of trauma. And so you have to get to the underpinning of what that circumstance was in order for the scar to dissolve. And that was my experience again and again and again. I really don't care about evidence, to be honest with you. Kelly, Steamy Chick, she's a data girl, and I love that about her. And she's also totally spiritual as well. But we know we need statistics because we want more women to get the care. And that's the only way that doctors will make recommendations. But I'm an experiential person. I'm a person that believes deeply in my own experience and what I feel and perceive with others, that I have a knowing that comes from inside me. And I don't even, people, I was a birth doula and they're like, well, do you do evidence-based practice? And it's just like, I just want to stick my finger down my throat, honestly. Like, I don't really care, because all that it's trends and they change, and people mount it to reinforce whatever their belief structure is anyway. So, yeah, but that's just me. I know the reason that I would spend so much of my life writing this book, because you just wrote one. It's so hard.
Oh my goodness.
It's so hard in so many ways that I never would have even imagined, is because I believe that it's tangible. It's within our reach to have a new future. It's within our reach to have a new future where it's just obvious that women would be cared for in this period of time, that life-giving would be that revered. And, in a lot of spiritual circles, they talk about, the divine mother and, now is the age, but what about actual mothers? Are we actually taking care of them? Mm-hmm. And so even if a woman didn't have this care, like I didn't, there are still ways that we can go back and repair. Repair is always possible. And we can be the ones that inform and share with the women in our neighbors, our community, our sisters, our aunts, whomever this information is important to. The book is great because it's pretty hard to convince someone who doesn't think this is important because they didn't do it and they made dinner the same night they came home from the hospital. And they don't really understand that the fact that they're prolapsed when they're 55 has anything to do with that potentially. But a book is like a third entity that a lot of, because I say it's great for women to read the book, but really we need everybody to have the information. So it's great for the mothers and the mothers-in-law and the partners and the, best friend who's going to be supporting you so that they can help you build the tribe and the net, rather than a woman being responsible, like having one more thing to do. Like you're already birthing the baby, feeding the baby, trying to keep yourself together. And now you've got to like orchestrate your entire care system. It's a lot.
Mm-hmm. I love that. I mean, if everyone around the woman were to read your book, then their view of this whole most important, crucial, it is one of the most important and most critical points of your life. And what's so interesting, I mean, when I talk about the menstrual cycle, one of the things I said in the book is like, if you stop menstruating, if women as a whole stop menstruating, there would be no next generation. That's how important your period is. So that's like one of the things I say in the book. And that, I mean, if you compare that to birth, how is it that the most magnificent experience in life, bringing another human being into life, is so downplayed? And women, we are actually the ones who facilitate that process, and somehow our societies basically turn their backs on us, right? And it's very interesting how we can downplay this most crucial part of humanity. very, very much the patriarchy, right? Like it's so evident.
Downplay, hide, silence. It's every way to keep it contained, sterile, composed. Everything that birth is not, right? Because birth is the quintessential feminine experience. It's wild, it's unpredictable, it's arrhythmic a lot, it's loud, it's disgusting in some cases. It's messy, it's revelatory, it's everything that doesn't fit into a grid.
Mm-hmm.
You can't chart it.
Well, there's this is a big topic, but just to kind of close out our interview, so I don't expect us to go into a ton of depth. I really enjoyed how you talked about this dichotomy that exists, like it's like the Virgin Mary kind of mothers are not sexual, right? It's like, whatever, mother/whore, and they're not, like, I don't know, just that I think everyone understands what I'm saying. And so you spend a lot of time in the book talking about how to reconnect with our bodies and our sexuality. And I would even put out there that given kind of the current status of women and the current practices around how we manage our fertility, the vast majority of women spend a lot of time on hormonal birth control. And for many women, birth is basically one of the first times that they're dragged into their bodies. So for many women, they're on the hormones for a long time, disconnected. And that is like the first time they're even like really in their bodies without any type of medication. So talk a little bit about how, as women, we can kind of reconnect with our femininity, reconnect with our sexuality in the face of all of the different challenges that we've spoken about that many women face in the postpartum period.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So there's a lot of different practices, right? There's all kinds of ways to, like in the book, I talk about vulvar breathing, which is just placing a hand on your vulva and then feeling your breath move all the way down, looking at yourself in the mirror, which can be really challenging post-birth because we're just afraid of how we changed and if we changed. But the intent in the book is, and just overall, is number one, that our sexuality is our own and it belongs to us. So it's not dependent on anyone else. We have a sexuality apart from partnership. But one of the reasons I emphasize so much relationship and intimacy in the book is because statistics show that marital satisfaction declines 67% within the first year post-birth. And then if you track relationships and separation and divorce over time, most people track it back to that time after they had the first baby. And then the Gottmans who did that research, they looked at the 33% that did not decline, that remained strong. And I guess as someone, I'm a single mom and I have been since my daughter was 9 months old. So I think also it's probably, I just see it as a time that could be so affirming for new parents that even though, of course, it's challenging, that with the right support and without all of the cultural overlays, basically like all the scripts that we have to get through about, either you're never going to have sex again or, all men want is sex, like all of these things that have actually been proven untrue, but they remain just like, oh, your vagina is going to get all stretched out. Like we know that's not true, but we still hear that I really wanted to provide a vantage point that actually, if we respect the fourth trimester, what we can hope for is that what is unresolved comes to the surface so that we can then resolve it. And it only makes sense that evolutionarily we would want the mother and father or the mothers to be stronger so that the baby has a stronger foundation to grow in. And then that strengthens our communities. And then that strengthens our planetary health. And as you mentioned love before, it's on the basis of love. It's on the basis of true intimacy. So everyone's going to have their own journey to how sexual and mother lands for them and their own scripts that have been handed to them by their mothers, their fathers. I teach a whole class on this called Forging a Feminine Path. It's about how our spirituality and our sexuality intertwined, and how most of us have been set up to believe that the more spiritual we are, the less sexual we are, or the more sexual we are, the less spiritual we are. And then we've got Mary, who's like the quintessence of spirituality, and yet was able to give birth without ever having sex, which now, a lot of people have said has happened differently or whatever, but it's a monumental opportunity at maturation. And it's what is being required of us culturally. And I hope that we'll rise to that.
Oh, well, I can't think of better words to end on. Kimberly, this has been an amazing conversation. One of those conversations that I could just stay in all day, to be honest with you. I'm so happy that you're doing this work. I do believe that things happen for a reason. And unfortunately, having the experience that you did, look what it has brought the world. So I'm just really, and I highly recommend your book, The Fourth Trimester. I think it's essential reading for all women. I feel like as a mom, there's just things that you don't know until you're a mom. It really hits you so out of the blue how challenging motherhood is for so many reasons. And having your book for, all the listeners who are pregnant or who are, trying to conceive and planning pregnancy, having a book like yours, specifically your book, going through that and reading that ahead of time. You mentioned in the book that it's what you wish you had had before you had embarked on, your motherhood journey. And I can, wholeheartedly say that, I feel like my first kind of, months and years after my first baby would have been very different had I had your book at that time. So thank you for being with us today.
Thank you so much, Lisa.
Well, and where can the listeners go to buy your book, learn more about what you do, and also listen to your podcast, Mega Mamas?
So my website is magamama.com, MAGAMAMA.com. For anyone who's wondering, Maga means sorceress in Portuguese, so it has nothing to do with our president. And my book is The Fourth Trimester, a postpartum guide to healing your body, balancing your emotions, and restoring your vitality. It's probably at your local bookstore. You can also get it through Shambhala, my publisher, or Amazon. On my website, there's also a place that has some independent booksellers if that's what you're looking for. And yeah, all my courses are listed on my website. Right now I'm in the middle of teaching a course called Mother Circle, and I have several other courses that I lead during the year, so people can find me there.
All right, perfect. Well, we'll put all the links to all the places in the show notes page. So thank you again for being with us, Kimberly.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening. If you enjoyed today's show, please share it with a friend. You'll find the show notes page for today's episode over at fertilityfriday.com/243. I hope that you enjoyed my episode with Kimberly and Johnson. I can't tell you how much I love this conversation. It was just such a treat to be able to take a deep dive into the postpartum period and really talk about what women need and to really get into the complexity of it, because I feel like after this conversation, it's clear that there's no easy solution. We've really identified a need that is missing in our culture. And it's not necessarily an easy solution. At the end of the day, women need to be taken care of in the postpartum period. And I think one of my favorite, just on that topic, kind of one of my favorite things that happened in the interview was really, at one point I said, I think every woman needs to have this book. Every woman who's pregnant, basically. And I love that Kimberly pointed out that, it's the family members, it's the parents, the caretakers, the partners that should be reading this book, because they're the ones that should be jumping in and really finding ways to support new moms. And I thought that was really profound, because yes, absolutely. Because the whole purpose of this period is to have a period where mom is being taken care for, because if you take good care of mom, she can take good care of baby. And when you say take care, there's lots of different levels of that. So we have like the basic needs, having somebody take care of the household stuff, like someone to clean the house and to do laundry and to make sure that the house is clean so that mom doesn't have to be doing that work. We have the level of nourishment and food, making sure that not only is mom eating, but that she's eating really nourishing food and has the opportunity to replenish those nutrients and really support her health postpartum to allow her to heal and to recover from birth, regardless of how baby came into the world. But, many women go on to have more than one child. So this really crucial period of replenishing nutrients postpartum can also set her up for, a healthy pregnancy the next time around if she's going to have more than one baby. But beyond that, just to feel healthy, just to have energy, just to be able to be there and take care of baby. And especially for new moms who are breastfeeding, ultimately, what you discover as a new breastfeeding mom is that you are the meal. You are dinner, lunch, breakfast, and snack. And really, everything that you nourish yourself with, that's what is going to, that's what your body's going to use to nourish your baby. So it's even more important to make sure that you are well nourished, well taken care of, so that you can really have what you need to be able to give to baby and still have some left for yourself, if you know what I'm saying. Your body is this incredible, vessel that is able to nourish your growing baby. But if you are not nutrient replete, if you don't have, deep nourishment, just, enough nourishment during that critical time, then you can become depleted. And so all of these things come into play. And then, of course, there's another level of having the emotional support. And so I just love how this conversation highlighted so many different aspects and really have a focus on the postpartum period, because as we talked about, that's something that we don't really think about. We think about pregnancy, we think about baby coming, but we don't necessarily think about what mom needs right after birth and how we can support her. And also as women, when we're pregnant, we don't necessarily think about setting up we don't think about setting ourselves up that way, setting ourselves up with a meal train or, what Kimberly suggested, having, a significant amount of money put aside so that you can actually, get what you need, get the support you need, get the food that you need, organize everything so that you don't have to be doing the work. Having a postpartum fund, that's really not something I've ever heard someone talk about. So loved this conversation and love that it highlighted this really crucial period in a woman's life where we really need help. And I remember myself going into pregnancy with my eldest son. I didn't really think, I thought that I would be fine. I thought that I would be able to handle it. I thought I would still be cooking dinner. I thought I would still be, doing all of the things in the house. I really didn't think that life would change as much as it did. And it was just a really interesting time when I transitioned to motherhood because, I don't know if you could say I transitioned, 1 minute I was in labor, the next minute I was a mom. But really, it was just really eye-opening, that experience of becoming a mom and realizing I didn't have all the time for all the things. Realizing that being a mom to a newborn was really just all-consuming. And it was really hard for me to find time to shower and stuff like that in those early weeks and months of being a new mom, let alone taking care of all of the household tasks and all of that. So yeah, I hope that you enjoyed today's episode. If you haven't done so already, make sure to head over to thefifthvitalsignbook.com to grab a free chapter of my new book, The Fifth Vital Sign, Master Your Cycles and Optimize Your Fertility. You will get chapter 1, as well as all of the front matter and information. So I know that you'll really love it. So again, that's thefifthvitalsignbook.com. And other than that, I just want to thank you for spending some time with me today and for tuning into the podcast. And as always, until next time, be well and happy charting.